All right, so continuing on with our vocal editing here, we've done creating a comp, trimming and fading, removing the low frequency rumble. We just finished fixing our loud breath noises. And so the next step is to fix sibilance. Sibilance is just a fancy word for those high frequency S type sounds, or sometimes you'll get them on T's or ch, sometimes on the CH sounds. But basically it's those high frequency sounds that tend to not sound super pleasant because they're the things that we don't hear as loud when we aren't putting a person's face directly in front of a microphone. Those S sounds in normal human life, when you're talking to another person, they tend to kind of dissipate in the air because you're usually not standing 6 inches away from someone's face. But when we put a microphone that close, all those sounds tend to be almost amplified. And so we have to try to duck them down a little bit so they're not so annoying. And some people have way more obnoxious sounding S sounds than others. So you are going to have to kind of adjust this based on the vocal that you're working with. So here we are back in Logic, and let's go ahead and get out of automation mode for the moment by typing A. And then we're going to go down here underneath our gain plugin, and we're going to add a very simple plugin under Dynamics to get rid of our S sounds. It's literally called the DeEsser. This one is the DeEsser 2 because it's the newer version of the DeEsser. The original version I thought was pretty terrible. The new version I think is much, much better. Now we could spend probably an hour talking about the DeEsser, and we're not going to, don't worry. We basically need to know kind of 2 or 3 big things. What does a DeEsser do? It's essentially a filter that looks at a particular area of the frequency spectrum. So if I pull up my EQ here, you can see that the frequency right now on our DeEsser is set to about 7,000 Hertz. So that's this area right over here. And essentially what it does is it filters out all the stuff below that area and all the stuff above that area. So all it's listening to is this part right here. And then it says, all right, anything that gets above a certain level that's in this frequency range, whenever that happens, I'm going to reduce the overall level of that frequency range. So it's essentially a kind of a filter combined with a compressor. And if you're not familiar with what a compressor does yet, because we're going to cover that in vocal mixing, essentially it's a volume knob that turns down things when they get too loud or when the level gets too high. All right, so I'm going to just leave the kind of stock setting here, and we're just going to run it. Sensing it, can't tell when you're going to throw a fit, sometimes. All right, and so what we want to do is just kind of find a spot where there's a particularly noticeable S's, like right here. Fit, sometimes feel like the... There we go. Now let's turn plugin off for a second. Fit, sometimes feel... You can hear that S really pops out. Fit, sometimes... Turn it back on. Fit, sometimes... You can hear it's been kind of pulled down just a little bit. And so all you need to worry about as you're getting started with this is trying to find the spot as you move this frequency knob around that feels like it's doing the best job of getting rid of the obnoxious S sound. Now you can listen to what the DeEsser is listening to by turning on this filter solo. Sometimes feel like the crazy one. Sometimes. Notice as I move this up or down. Sometimes feel it, sometimes feel it, sometimes feel it, sometimes feel it, sometimes. All right, and then you can also turn, there's a couple different types of filters. Sometimes feel it, sometimes feel it, sometimes feel it, sometimes. All right, and we'll turn that back off. Sometimes feel it, sometimes. Okay, and then then we need to worry about is the threshold. So we want to see this thing moving over here, essentially only when we're actually hearing those really kind of obnoxious S's or T sounds or ch or that sort of thing. Sometimes. So if you're seeing it moving kind of constantly, that probably means your threshold is a bit too low. And so we need to bring it up a little higher so that the level has to be higher before it actually triggers the DeEsser.
Sometimes feel like the crazy one.
Okay, and so anytime you see this guy moving over here, that's telling you that it's reducing the gain, which means that the plugin is actually doing something.
Sometimes feel like the crazy one.
Right, and then max reduction just basically controls how much can it pull down that S sound. So if this is super high like this, that means it can only lower it by about 2.4 dBs. Whereas if it's way down like this, that means it can make a huge change and pull it down to all the way to 25 dBs quieter.
Sometimes feel like the crazy.
Okay, and so you can go way overboard with a DeEsser. So if I pull the threshold way down, so it's going to kind of de-ess everything, and then I give it a huge amount of maximum reduction.
Sometimes feel like the crazy one.
I'm going to go.
Sometimes feel like the crazy one.
Now it's just kind of de-essing everything, right?
Sometimes. Sometimes. Sometimes.
Okay, and then if you get these settings wrong, what you'll start noticing is the S starts sounding very strange.
Sometimes feel.
Let's see if I can find a good spot here.
Sometimes feel like.
I'm gonna actually switch this to absolute.
Sometimes feel like the crazy one. Sometimes feel like the crazy one. Sometimes. Sometimes feel.
There we go.
Sometimes. Sometimes. Sometimes feel like the crazy one. Sometimes feel like the crazy one. Sometimes feel like the crazy one.
So I wish I could give you a, always do this or always do that with the DeEsser. But at least in my experience, it really comes down to a bit of trial and error and just moving stuff around, seeing the difference between, okay, do I like the sound of when it's split versus when it's wide, when it's this filter, when it's this filter. And the only way you're going to know that is to just simply listen, click and change, see if you notice a difference. You're almost always going to have an opinion with the DeEsser because they're fairly noticeable differences. And just pick the one that you feel like sounds the best in terms of being the most natural sounding, but also effectively lowering the S sounds. And just to clarify, the DeEsser is there for not just the S sounds. It's also for, like I said, any of those t or ch or k, any of those high frequency sounds that tend to pop out. But S's are often the most obnoxious. So there you go. That's how we remove or fix sibilance, right? That's that term, sibilance.